Hello and welcome back to another video. This is Jennifer McGuire. So last week I shared a video with 5 resist techniques. I had such fun doing that video that I decided to revisit the traditional resist technique and share more that you can do with it, including layering. If you haven't watched that other technique video, be sure to do so first and I'll link to it here. Now this is a great way to create soft backgrounds with pretty much any stamps you may have. Now I will share the layering technique later in this video, but first I wanted to review the basic resist technique and use it to create these subtle backgrounds. Now my first few cards feature the new Altenew Starry flower stamp set. These flower clusters are just beautiful. I have a piece of cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just quickly stamping the 2 flower clusters repeatedly over the background. This will be used as a guide for my stamping, since this technique starts out invisible, so you're not really sure where to stamp. I can use this guide on a card later if I wanted to. Once I have the entire background filled up, I put it into my MISTI stamping tool. This stamping tool will be helpful for this technique, but you definitely don't need it. I'm lining up one of the flower cluster images with one of the images on my guide, transfer it into my MISTI, and now I'm going to stamp this onto Ranger Specialty stamping paper. For this traditional resist technique, you need a coated or glossy cardstock. This specialty stamping paper is fantastic for this. I really like the coated smooth surface that it offers, but glossy paper works also. So I stamped that flower with VersaMark ink onto that specialty paper. And I actually have a few more pieces of that specialty paper that I'm going to stamp the same images on, so I can make several cards at once. After I've done that, I'm putting my guide back into my MISTI, lining up the 2 flower clusters with the stamping on the guide, and then I will stamp these with VersaMark ink onto those specialty stamping paper pieces. Now, you will not be able to see this VersaMark ink. It is clear, and it really kind of gets lost on that coated cardstock. So that's why I'm using a guide, so that I make sure that I don't overlap my stamping. I wanted a clean background. So you also want to put a little mark on the back so you know which side is up on your cardstock, so you don't put it into your MISTI the wrong direction. Once you've done all of your stamping, you want to heat set this until there is absolutely no shine from that VersaMark ink stamping on that coated paper. Once you've dried it completely, you'll know because the images completely disappear, there's no shine. Then you can take any dye ink and just generously apply it over the top of those stamped images. Once you've applied the ink, you can buff it dry and repeat that a few times if you want to intensify it. And you can see how that ink resists the color on top. It's almost magical. It's just beautiful, and it creates this really cool finish because you're using a specialty cardstock for this. So it'll either have a glossy or kind of matte coated finish like you see here. You can see the subtle images that resisted the dye ink that you put on top. The Altenew inks happen to work perfect for this technique, and I do believe that it works better with darker color inks as opposed to light ones, which really don't show up very well on the coated cardstock. Here you can see the results of the 3 that I created, a nice soft background that would work with pretty much any card. Now before we move on to more techniques, I thought I'd turn these into cards. I used this leaf die that actually coordinates with this Altenew Garden Silhouette stamp set. So I'm just using the die but not the stamp set. I'm also using the new Altenew Fine Alphabet die set. I cut a bunch of words and stacked them together so that there was dimension to all of the letters. And I actually took that with me with a bowl and did that in front of the TV while I watched the royal wedding. It seemed like the right thing to do. Next, I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. And I've lined up one of my resist backgrounds to kind of be on it at an angle. And I'm using my Holtz trimmer to trim off anything that hangs off the edges. I can actually save these small pieces for another card. Okay, so next I wanted to add this with dimension. So I have a piece of white craft foam that has a little dimension to it. I'm using my Gina Connect liquid adhesive to adhere the craft foam on the back of my stamped panel. Then I will use some large scissors to trim off any of the craft foam that's hanging out. Again, I can use more liquid adhesive, and then I can adhere this to my card. I like to use liquid adhesive because I can kind of wiggle it around until it's perfectly positioned and then let it dry there. Next, I am going to add the word hugs that I die cut with that Altenew alphabet die set, along with a few vellum leaves that I die cut with the garden silhouette die I showed you earlier. I'm actually adhering the leaves by having them behind the letters, so the adhesive on the letters actually anchor the vellum leaves in place. That way I don't have to worry about hiding my adhesive. Now these are stacked letter die cuts. I die cut 4 of each letter and glued them on top of each other so they'd really stand out against those vellum leaves. This vellum that I'm using is like a platinum shimmer vellum that's just gorgeous. Okay, so then I added some pearls to that, and that also helps to anchor those leaves down onto the card. And I white heat embossed the message sending right above the word hugs. Now that sending is from this older Altenew stamp set called the Frosted Garden stamp set. I use this one a lot because I like the message sending hugs and also sweet friend there at the bottom. So I kept the embellishments very simple on this card so that you could see that resist background. Here's the green example. I trimmed that one down and added it with craft foam. This time I put gold glitter paper from Simon Says Stamp on the top of my stacked U letter die cuts. And I created a sentiment strip that says "You Amaze Me" using this older stamp set from the Altenew New Day card kit. I like the style of the sentiments in this stamp set because they're great for sentiment strips. Now my third card, using one of the resist backgrounds, I die cut the letters "Miss You" and added a white glitter cardstock die cuts to the top of those just for a little bit of shine. So you can see how these subtle resist backgrounds work great for just about any card. I have one more card showing the basic resist technique, this time using a background stamp. Here is the Altenew Rustic Linen stamp set. This is great for just creating a look of texture on a background. And I also really like the sentiments. In fact, I used this sentiment for the envelopes on my cards for today's video. I have a piece of that coated specialty stamping paper in my MISTI, and I'm stamping that background with VersaMark Ink. Again, I'm going to heat set that completely, and then I can apply any dye ink over it. I wanted to show you if you use a light ink, it's not going to show up much. So here I'm going with a little bit darker of an ink, and you can still see it's very subtle. I do find this works best with darker inks. Now the ink that you put on this paper won't look as vibrant as it would on regular cardstock, so you can reach for darker colors and it'll still be beautiful. I like how this linen stamp gives a subtle resist technique. Now for the main part of this card, I used the new Altenew Botanical You stamp set. Now I just did regular stamping with this, no resist technique, but I wanted to show you how easy it comes together. I really like when a layering stamp set makes things easy and it makes it look like you spent a lot of time. So I stamped the first layer with the Frayed Leaf Altenew ink. Now I'm coming in with the Forest Glades green ink for the second layer, and look how well they line up. This one's easy to line up because there are 3 flower clusters, one on each letter, that line up each time, so it makes it very simple to do. Now for the third, I used the Coral Berry ink, and for the fourth layer, I used Red Velvet. This really creates great looking letters with really no time at all. I'm using the coordinating die to cut out each of the letters, and then I'll adhere these onto my card. After that, I stamped Are So Kind from that same stamp set. And here you can see that beautiful resist background that's very subtle using that linen stamp. Now I did add little dots of glitter to the little berries on the U. And at this point I realized that my U in the word U is a little bit high. I do stuff like this all the time, so I just carefully peeled it off. I had used little bits of foam tape to adhere it. And then I just put more liquid adhesive on the foam tape, put it back on my card, and nobody will ever know that I had to tear it off and reposition it. Okay, so now we're on to layered resist. We've covered the basics of resist, so we're going to step it up by layering with a layering stamp set. The stamp set that I'm using for this card is the Altenew Crown Bloom stamp set. Now you could use any layering set for this, however I really liked the large layered leaf included in this set. Now I wanted to remind you that Altenew stamp layering sets come with a guide in the packaging, and I encourage you to keep them. They're very helpful when you're doing your stamping. So here I have a piece of scrap white cardstock, and I'm quickly creating a guide by just stamping the solid image of the leaf, the most solid image, all over the background of the cardstock. Again, this is just going to be a guide, so I'm quickly stamping. Now I'm going to mark the top of this so that I don't get it flipped around as I'm creating, and I write top on the back of my specialty stamping paper, my coated cardstock piece. Now I'm lining up the first leaf right there in the center, closing the MISTI door on it, and now I can put in my coated paper. Glossy paper works once again, and I'll stamp that leaf image with VersaMark ink. You really want to make sure to press this firmly since it's a large solid image, and you want to transfer as much of that VersaMark ink onto the cardstock that you can. Now I put an X on that leaf so I know that I've already done it, since that VersaMark ink is pretty much invisible on my stamped background. I didn't want to accidentally do it again. So I lined up my next leaf, and I'm stamping that with VersaMark ink. Now I'm going to repeat this until I have stamped all of those leaves onto that specialty stamping paper. After I completely heat set this until the image is disappeared, I applied frayed leaf ink over top. Any dye ink should work for this. And I put down one layer, wiped away the excess ink, and then put another layer just to make it a little bit more intense. I did want a softer color in this background. Now I'm putting this back into my MISTI stamping tool, and it's time to stamp the additional layers of the leaves. So this one provides some detail. So I lined it up with the resist image on my card, and I'm stamping this with that same frayed leaf green ink. So I'm using the same color that I used for the resist on the background. Now this ink won't dry right away because it is a coated cardstock. So to soften the ink a little bit, I just dabbed it with my dry cloth just one time, which you'll see me do again here. So I stamped, and I'll just dab it a little bit just to soften the color. You could heat set it as is if you want to. Next, I'm going in with the outline layered image for this leaf, and I'm stamping this with a slightly darker color. And you can see I wasn't careful to line it up perfectly. I wanted to have kind of artsy looking background, so I didn't take much care to line everything up. And I really like the look of the layering. So the bottom layer of the leaf is the resist. Then I stamped the 2 additional layers on top. Once I was done with that, I set it aside to dry, or you could heat set it. Next, I'm creating a layered flower and leaf on regular cardstock. So we're just doing basic stamping here. Now with layered stamped images, I usually start with the most solid image first, the bottom layer. But in this case, I started with the outline. The reason I started with the outline is I felt that it was easier to line up the images in this particular set. So sometimes you have to experiment on which layer to start with. Usually I find starting with the bottom most solid layer to be the easiest, but if there is an outline image in the layering set, sometimes it's best to start with that. So I used some reds and gold colors for the flower. Then I used the same greens for the layered leaf that you see above. So that leaf will match the background that we have. Now my regular stamping that I do on this white cardstock will be darker than the resist background, but I wanted my background to be softer. Here I'm using a Ranger detail blending tool to add just a little bit of color to the white areas of this flower. The white areas are beautiful as is, but I really wanted a more solid pink flower. And by using this little blending tool, I'm able to get into the small areas very easily. After cutting out the flower and the leaf, I wanted to make the edges a little bit darker so they would stand out against that background. So I'm using the little detail blending tool to add darker ink to the edges of my flower and to the edges of my leaf. Adding that little bit of dark definition around the outside edge really makes it stand out when you have a patterned background. So I trimmed down my background and added that along with flowers to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I added a sentiment strip that says "I am here for you," and that is from that Starry flower stamp set that I used earlier in this video. I'm using my jewel picker to pick up little Lucy's Cards pearls to scatter around the background, and then I use my Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to add a little bit of shimmer to the center of the flower. So here you can see the final card. There's that little bit of shimmer at the center of the flower, and you have that soft layered resist background. It matches perfectly with the flower that we added on top, but has a much softer look to it. That's the fun of resist techniques, and it adds so much to give the layering elements to it also. Okay, here's another example of a layered background. For this one, I used the new Altenew Bride-to-Be stamp set. Now, I'm not getting married anytime soon, so those images or the sentiments on this aren't ones that I would reach for, but I loved the flowers in the set. And you can see the beautiful layered cluster that you can create with all the many floral elements included in the set. So I thought they would be perfect for a layered resist background. Now, to create my guide for stamping, I drew a diagonal line on my white cardstock piece. I'm going to arrange all of the bottom layers of the flowers and leaves on one side of this card. By doing this, I could stamp it twice, rotating between, and fill the entire background. So here I'll stamp it so you can see how they are all positioned. Next, I'm putting in a piece of that specialty stamping paper. You could use glossy cardstock, and I'm stamping those images with VersaMark ink. Once I've stamped it once, I'll take the piece out and rotate it and stamp it again. By doing this diagonal trick, you can fill up an entire background with images very quickly. So remember, these are the most solid layers of these layering images, so like the background of the images. After I'm done, I'm heat setting that, and then again applying that frayed leaf ink on top. I did 2 coats once again, just to intensify it a bit. So now it's time to add the layered details from the stamp set on top of these flowers. So I'm using the same color of ink. This time I'm just using acrylic block. Now I will say you want to be sure not to touch these inks that you stamp on top until they're dry or until you've heat set them, or else they will smear since this is a coated cardstock. So I stamped many of the details, and I switched to a slightly darker ink so I could add even more details from the layering set. So this is an excellent way to get a subtle background using your layering sets. If you did this with regular stamping, it'd be hard to achieve. These are the new Altenew Fine Frames dies. I'm using the circle die set on the left to create some rings to add to our card. Along with these rings, I stamped some flowers and die cut them, just regular stamping using the same set. And I also die cut and stacked the letters U. I have gold glitter on the top of the U now, but I end up switching to black cardstock. So I'm arranging the flowers down, and then I'm adding a few of these rings, 3 of the rings, by tucking them under the flowers. I thought the rings were just fun elements to kind of create this little focal point cluster for our sentiment. I adhere them by tucking them behind the flower die cuts, and then adding a few little dots of liquid adhesive here and there. So I took off the glitter layer of the U and put black cardstock down instead. And I'm covering it with Tonic crystal glaze. This will give it dimension and shine. This comes out very easily from the bottle, so you basically just need to hold it and move the glaze around with the tip to get an even cover. I added this stamp sentiment, "I am here for," in front of the die cut U. And there we have our finished card along with a few little pearls to match. I really like that soft resist background. That's something that would be hard to achieve with basic stamping. So there you have a way to use your resist technique for subtle backgrounds, including layered images. If you are interested in more resist techniques, there are a couple other videos there in the middle. You can find the supplies that I use below in my YouTube description, but be sure to go to my blog to find out more information. Thanks for spending time with me, and we'll see you again soon.